Karen slammed her hand on the HOA table and declared herself the one in charge. But within minutes, the entire neighborhood had enough. Chairs scraped, voices rose, and people walked out, leaving Karen speechless. What would you have done if your HOA meeting was hijacked like this? The HOA meeting room was supposed to feel safe, neutral. A plain beige hall with stackable chairs, a long wooden table up front, and a buzzing fluorescent light that hummed like an impatient audience. Usually, neighbors came here with coffee in thermoses, notebooks in hand, ready to complain about lawn lengths or budget allocations. But tonight, the air carried something sharper, the tension of people who already knew trouble was coming. Karen did not walk into the room. She stormed. Her heels struck the tiled floor like a judge's gavel, every step demanding attention. A thick folder of papers was clutched in her manicured hand, and her lips were pressed tight with determination. Heads turned. Conversations died down. The HOA president, Mr. Jeffries, glanced up from his notes, uneasy. Without waiting for order, Karen marched straight to the front table and slammed her folder down so hard the sound echoed off the walls. A few neighbors flinched. "This meeting," she announced, her voice dripping with self-importance, "is officially under my control." Gasps rippled through the room. Mr. Jeffries blinked at her. "Karen, this is a community meeting. I'm the elected president. You don't just—" "Oh, spare us the speech, Jeffries," she snapped, cutting him off. "Everyone here knows you've been running this HOA into the ground. Mismanaged funds. No accountability. It ends tonight." Murmurs broke out. Some exchanged uneasy glances, others shook their heads. One woman whispered, "Here we go again?" Karen raised her hand for silence as though she already held authority. When no one obeyed quickly enough, she smacked the table again. "Quiet. You'll all get your say later. For now, things are changing." Her eyes swept across the neighbors like a hawk circling prey. "I have here," she said, tapping her folder, "a set of amendments and new bylaws. Starting tonight, these are the rules of this neighborhood." "You can't do that," called out a man from the back, voice steady but firm. He was a younger homeowner, mid-30s, sitting beside his wife. "Bylaws have to be voted on, reviewed by the community. That's HOA procedure." Karen's gaze zeroed in on him like a laser. "Don't lecture me, Brandon. You've lived here less than a year. Renters like you don't understand how things work." Gasps again, this time louder, angrier. Brandon's wife stiffened. "We're not renters. We own our home. And you don't get to dismiss people because they're new." Karen rolled her eyes, loud and exaggerated. "Oh please. You bought in what, last spring? That hardly makes you stakeholders compared to those of us who've invested decades into this community." The room was heating up. Some shook their heads at her arrogance. Others whispered among themselves. But Karen wasn't finished. She whipped the folder open and pulled out a sheet, waving it like evidence in a trial. "From this moment on, no trash bins will be left outside past 5 p.m. No holiday decorations beyond approved HOA color schemes. And fines will triple for violations." "What?" someone blurted. "That's insane," another shouted. Karen smiled coldly. "It's called discipline. Something this neighborhood sorely lacks." Mr. Jeffries tried to intervene, voice raised now. "Karen, enough. You don't have the authority to." "Authority?" She laughed harshly. "I've got signatures. I've got support. Half this neighborhood is sick of your weak leadership. I'm stepping in because someone has to." She waved her papers again. But this time, a sharp-eyed neighbor in the second row frowned. "Those signatures, whose are they?" Karen ignored the question. She kept talking, faster now, riding the wave of her own anger. "You've let this place turn into a circus, Jeffries. Lawns unkempt. Driveways cluttered. This neighborhood was supposed to be exclusive. Prestigious. Look at it now, like some bargain bin suburb. That's why I'm here. To clean it up. To restore order." Her voice carried a dangerous certainty, the kind that didn't allow room for debate. The neighbors sat frozen, torn between disbelief and outrage. Brandon shook his head and muttered, "This can't be real." But it was. And Karen wasn't slowing down. "You will all follow these rules starting tonight," she declared. "No excuses. No debates. This is happening whether you like it or not." The young wife raised her voice now, trembling but determined. "You don't get to just take over. That's not democracy. That's dictatorship." Karen shot her a withering glare. "Democracy doesn't work with sheep who can't think for themselves." The wife's mouth fell open. Gasps filled the room again. This time, the whispers turned into a low rumble of frustration. People began shifting in their seats, no longer just passive observers. And then, quietly, almost unnoticed, an older man in the back row pulled out his phone. His hands shook slightly as he scrolled and tapped. A few sitting near him leaned in, curious. He didn't look up. He just pressed the phone to his ear, muttering a few words before slipping it back into his pocket. Karen, oblivious, kept ranting at the crowd. If you don't like it, you can move out. But I guarantee most of you will thank me once this place has standards again. The murmurs grew louder. Some neighbors crossed their arms. Others whispered, "She can't do this." A woman in the front row turned to her husband. "What if she's serious?" The tension was thick enough to choke on. And then Karen's smile spread wider. She slapped the table again. "Effective immediately, these bylaws are law. And I dare anyone here to challenge me." The room went silent, hanging on her words. But all eyes shifted to the older man who had made that mysterious phone call. His face was calm now, almost too calm. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, eyes fixed on Karen like he already knew something the rest didn't. Karen noticed him staring. "What?" she snapped. "Do you have a problem with authority too?" He didn't answer. He just smiled faintly. The neighbors exchanged puzzled glances. Something was about to happen, and nobody knew what. Karen has just declared her new bylaws law, but the mysterious phone call made by the elderly man suggests a storm is about to break. The room sits on edge, waiting for the fallout. The silence after Karen's declaration was heavy, not the silence of agreement, but the silence of disbelief. Neighbors sat frozen in their chairs, jaws clenched, eyes darting to one another. The fluorescent light buzzed above like it was mocking them. Finally Brandon, the younger homeowner Karen had mocked earlier, stood up. His chair scraped loudly against the tile, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the tense room. "This is ridiculous," he said, voice clear, steady. "Karen, you can't just walk in here and declare yourself in charge. That's not how this works." Karen tilted her head, a smile curling on her lips. "Spoken like someone who doesn't understand responsibility." "No," Brandon shot back louder now, "spoken like someone who understands community. We bought here because we wanted a neighborhood where everyone has a say. Not one person. Not you." A few murmurs of agreement rose up. A woman nodded from the back row. A man in the corner muttered, "He's right." Karen's smile tightened, the corners of her mouth quivering. "Don't flatter yourself. You haven't even been here a year. I've lived in this community for 22 years. I know what's best for it." Brandon's wife stood too, her voice trembling at first but gaining strength with every word. "And yet, in all those years, you've managed to alienate every neighbor on this street. People cross the road when they see you. You bully, you gossip, you harass. You don't want what's best for us, you want control." The room erupted in whispers. Heads turned. Some even clapped quietly, though Karen's glare quickly silenced them. "Sit down, sweetheart," Karen sneered at the wife. "This isn't about your little feelings. This is about law and order." "No, Karen," the wife snapped, fire in her tone now. "This is about your ego." "Yes." Someone whispered. Finally someone said it. Karen's face flushed crimson. "You people have no idea what leadership means. You think Jeffries does?" She jabbed a finger toward the HOA president, who still sat at the front, stunned. "He's weak. He lets things slide. That's why lawns look like jungles and kids run wild in the streets. He's failed, and I'm the only one willing to step up." "Failed?" Jeffries finally spoke, his voice breaking the tension like a crack in the wall. "Karen, I've done my best. I've volunteered years of my time. Not for power. Not for praise. For this community. And I've always listened. To everyone. Something you've never done." More neighbors nodded. The tide was shifting. Karen slapped her papers on the table again, desperate to reassert dominance. "These signatures prove I have support. Enough to enforce these bylaws whether you like it or not." "Show us," someone demanded from the middle row. Karen blinked, faltered for just a moment, then held the papers higher. "Confidential," she snapped. Laughter bubbled up, bitter and sharp. A man in the corner called out, "Convenient." Karen's teeth clenched. "You think this is a game? You think I won't enforce this?" "Try it," Brandon muttered, arms crossed. The room vibrated with rising energy. Neighbors shifted in their chairs, some standing, some whispering furiously. The younger families were fed up. The older residents looked tired, but something in their eyes suggested they too had had enough. Karen raised her voice, drowning them out. "Fine them. Triple fines. Shut down their little rule-breaking habits and maybe, just maybe, this neighborhood will have standards again." "Standards?" Jeffrey said, voice trembling with controlled anger. Or obedience? Karen smirked. What's the difference? The crowd reacted, some gasping, others muttering, a few outright booing. For the first time, Karen's control cracked. And in the back, the elderly man who had made the phone call earlier leaned forward, watching everything with calm eyes. He wasn't rattled. He wasn't angry. He was patient, almost like he was waiting for the perfect moment. Karen, the young wife said again, her voice steadier now, you don't scare us anymore. We're done being pushed around by you. Speak for yourself, Karen barked. Plenty of people support me. More than you realize. Then why, Brandon said, his voice low but carrying through the room, are you the only one standing at the front, alone? The words landed like a blow. The neighbors grew louder, emboldened. Some shouted questions. Others demanded to see her so-called documents. A man shouted, she's bluffing. Karen's nostrils flared. I will not be disrespected like this. She pounded the table again. I am in control of this meeting. Do you understand me? The noise drowned her out. For once, Karen's voice wasn't the loudest in the room. And then, faint at first but growing closer, the sound of sirens drifted through the open windows. The room stilled. Heads turned. Conversations froze. Karen blinked, confused, then smiled triumphantly. Finally, she said, order is coming. But the neighbors didn't look relieved. They looked wary. Brandon turned toward the back row, toward the elderly man who sat with his arms crossed, eyes glinting with quiet knowledge. He didn't look surprised by the sirens at all. In fact, he looked like he'd been expecting them. Karen followed everyone's gaze, her smile faltering. What? She snapped. What are you all staring at? The old man finally leaned forward, his voice calm, even gentle. You might want to be careful what you wish for, Karen. Order is coming, just not the way you think. The sirens grew louder. Tires crunched on gravel outside. The neighbors sat frozen, caught between fear and anticipation. Karen's smile cracked. What did you do? She hissed. Police sirens have arrived, and the elderly man seems to know exactly why. The neighbors watch as Karen's confidence begins to fracture. The wail of sirens outside made the fluorescent-lit room feel smaller, tighter. Neighbors turned toward the windows as flashing red and blue lights danced across the beige walls. Chairs squeaked. Someone whispered, who called them? Karen's lips stretched into a thin smile. For a moment, she looked like a queen, certain her reinforcements had arrived. She smoothed her blouse, lifted her chin, and addressed the crowd with theatrical calm. Finally, she said, now maybe some of you will start showing respect. Brandon's wife muttered under her breath, respect has to be earned, not demanded. Karen heard her, but instead of firing back, she faced the door like she was about to be vindicated. The double doors swung open. 2 uniformed officers entered, their expressions sharp but calm. The room fell into silence, save for the faint hum of the ceiling light and Karen's heels clicking as she strode toward them. Officers, Karen began dramatically, thank goodness you're here. I was just about to have this meeting shut down. These people, she gestured broadly toward the neighbors, have become hostile. I've been threatened, shouted down, and harassed. I demand protection. The younger officer raised an eyebrow. Ma'am, we got a call about a disturbance. We're here to understand what's going on. Disturbance? Brandon scoffed. The only disturbance is her barging in and trying to hijack this meeting. The room erupted, neighbors speaking over one another, voices tumbling into chaos. Some shouted about Karen's fake rules. Others tried to explain how she wasn't even authorized. The officers raised their hands for quiet. The older one, more seasoned, spoke firmly. One at a time. We'll get the facts straight. Starting with you, ma'am. He nodded at Karen. Karen placed her hand on her chest like a wronged heroine. Thank you, officer. My name is Karen Whitmore. I've lived here over 20 years. I've watched this community fall apart under weak leadership. Tonight, when I tried to implement necessary changes, these people turned violent. Violent? A woman barked from the back. Nobody touched you. Karen's voice rose. Words can be violence too. Their hostility is abusive. The crowd groaned. Someone muttered, unbelievable. The officer held up his hand again. Do you have any proof of this hostility? Karen whipped her papers from her folder with a flourish. I have signatures here authorizing me to enforce new bylaws. This meeting was supposed to be about progress, but these people don't care about rules. The younger officer leaned closer, glancing at the documents. His brow furrowed. These don't look official. Karen bristled. Of course they're official. What would you know about HOA procedures? Brandon stood again, voice cutting through the noise. They're forged. Everyone here knows it. Ask her to show you the signatures. Half of them belong to people who aren't even present tonight. The neighbors roared in agreement. One woman stood up and said, I never signed anything. Another shouted, neither did I. Karen's face reddened, her voice rising to compete with theirs. They're lying. They're all liars. I'm the only one trying to save this neighborhood. The older officer raised his hand, stern now. Enough shouting. Ma'am, if these documents are legitimate, you won't mind us taking a closer look. Karen hesitated. Just a flicker, but enough for the crowd to notice. The room buzzed with suspicion. You see, Brandon's wife said, her tone steady. She can't prove it, because it's all a bluff. Karen snapped her head around, eyes blazing. Shut your mouth. You don't know what you're talking about. The officer's gaze hardened. Ma'am, don't speak to her like that. Everyone here has the right to be heard. The words landed heavily. For the first time, Karen wasn't the loudest authority in the room. The officers were. Karen tried to pivot. Look, officer, maybe you don't understand. These people, she gestured to the crowd again, they've always been against me. They don't appreciate standards. They let their trash bins sit out for days, their kids scream in the streets. I'm trying to restore order. Her words fell flat. The neighbors weren't buying it. The elderly man in the back finally spoke, his voice calm and steady. Order doesn't come from lies, Karen. And you know it. All eyes turned toward him. His tone was quiet, but it carried weight. Karen stiffened. You again. What's your problem? He didn't flinch. My problem is people who abuse power. People who think they can intimidate others with fake authority. Karen's eyes narrowed. And who do you think you are? The old man leaned forward, resting his arms on his knees. His voice was still calm. The person who made that phone call. The officers turned toward him. You called us. He nodded. Yes. Because I've seen this woman try to steamroll her neighbors one too many times. Tonight, she crossed a line. Karen scoffed, but her voice cracked just slightly. You can't prove anything. The man smiled faintly. That's where you're wrong. The room erupted with murmurs. Karen's confidence faltered again, her knuckles tightening around her papers. For the first time she looked less like a queen, and more like a cornered animal. The younger officer stepped forward. Sir, what exactly do you mean by that? The old man sat back, folding his arms. Let's just say I kept a copy of the real HOA documents. The deed. The original bylaws. And the names of the actual board members. Karen froze. The crowd erupted again, this time in gasps of shock and murmurs of excitement. Brandon turned to his wife, whispering, I knew it. I knew she was bluffing. Karen tried to laugh it off, though her voice was shaky. You expect anyone to believe you? You're just some old man with a grudge. The old man's calm gaze didn't waver. Maybe. But I've got the paperwork. And it doesn't have your name anywhere on it. The neighbors cheered. For the first time the room was united against Karen. Her face twisted in fury, and she slammed her hands on the table. This meeting isn't over. I'm not done. The older officer stepped forward, his tone firm. Actually, ma'am, it just might be. The elderly man has hinted that he holds the real HOA documents. The officers prepare to demand proof. Karen is cornered but still fighting. The officers stood framed in the doorway, the flashing red and blue lights from their cruisers spilling across the hardwood floor of the community hall. The crowd, once buzzing with outrage, fell into a heavy silence. Karen seized the moment like a victor on a battlefield. She straightened her blazer, smoothed her hair, and strode toward the officers with exaggerated confidence. Officers, she said, her voice rising with false authority. Thank goodness you're here. These people are threatening me, disrupting our HOA meeting, and refusing to comply with community regulations. I need you to remove them immediately. Gasps rippled through the hall. Daniel folded his arms, his jaw tightening. Sarah, still recording, shifted her phone to capture the officer's arrival. Robert stood near the front, his hand in his pocket where the folded letter still rested like a loaded weapon. The taller of the two officers raised an eyebrow. His nameplate read Sergeant Miller, and his calm, measured tone cut through the tension. Ma'am, why don't you tell us exactly what's going on here? Karen gestured dramatically at the residents. It's all on record. I'm the acting HOA authority, and this group is harassing me. They're out of control. They're refusing to follow the rules, and some of them even threaten me. The shorter officer, Officer Ramirez, glanced at the crowd. Is that true? Before Karen could answer for them, Daniel's steady voice broke the silence. No, officer. That's not true. If anything, it's the other way around. Karen spun toward him, her voice shrill. Lies. He's the ringleader. Arrest him first. A nervous laugh spread through the residence. The absurdity of her demand hung in the air like smoke. Sergeant Miller frowned. Ma'am, we don't just arrest people because you point at them. If there are allegations, we need to hear both sides. Karen's face tightened, but she forced a smile. Of course. But you'll see, they've been disruptive, disobedient, and frankly dangerous. Sarah took a step forward, her baby nestled against her shoulder. She raised her phone higher. I've been recording this whole meeting, officers. If you want to see who's been disruptive and dangerous, I'll be happy to show you. Karen froze, her confidence faltering. That video is illegal. She can't record me without permission. Sergeant Miller shook his head. Public meetings like this? Perfectly legal. Go ahead, ma'am, show us what you've got. The crowd murmured with approval. Karen's eyes darted wildly as Sarah swiped through her phone and tapped play. The recording filled the room. Karen's voice blared out, "This meeting is now under my control. Effective immediately, you will all follow my rules." The officer's eyes narrowed. Sarah skipped forward in the video. Karen's voice echoed again, "If you don't like it, I'll fine you first." The residents couldn't help themselves, snickers and bitter laughs broke out. Even Officer Ramirez tilted his head, clearly unimpressed. Karen's voice cracked. "That's out of context. She cut it to make me look bad." But Sarah only shook her head. "Keep watching." The officers did. And as Karen's threats spilled from the phone, talk of arbitrary fines, demands for silence, screams of, "I said sit down." Her mask began to crumble. Finally, Sarah stopped the video. "That's who's been harassing us. Not the other way around." The hall erupted in murmurs of agreement. Sergeant Miller turned to Karen, his tone firmer now. "Ma'am, do you hold an official position on this HOA board?" Karen stammered. "Well, I oversee things. I take initiative." "Do you hold an elected position?" he pressed. Her silence was damning. Robert chose that moment to step forward, his voice steady but filled with quiet fire. "Officers, if I may. There's something else you need to see." He pulled the folded letter from his pocket and handed it to Sergeant Miller. The officer unfolded it carefully, scanning the text. His eyes narrowed as he read. "Is this what it looks like?" Ramirez asked, leaning over his shoulder. Miller nodded slowly. "It's a bank letter. Looks like confirmation of a transfer from the HOA account directly into someone's personal account. The treasurer's account." Gasps erupted again. Neighbors pointed at Karen, their voices rising in outrage. Karen lunged forward, her voice breaking. "That's a forgery. It's not real. They planted it." But her desperation only made her guilt look clearer. Daniel's voice boomed over the commotion. "She's been stealing from us. Using fake fines to cover her tracks. And now we have proof." The officers exchanged a look. Ramirez scribbled notes on a pad, while Miller refolded the letter, his expression unreadable. Karen's breathing grew erratic. She clutched her binder like a lifeline, flipping pages frantically. No, you don't understand. I was just borrowing. The community owes me. I've worked harder than anyone to keep this place together." Her words fell flat, drowned out by the chorus of voices condemning her. "Borrowing? That's stealing. You lined your pockets while fining us for Christmas lights. You should be ashamed." Karen's mask cracked. Her hands shook as she turned desperately to the officers. "You believe me, don't you? You'll take my side." But Sergeant Miller's voice was firm. "Ma'am, right now things don't look good for you. We're going to need to get statements from everyone here." Karen's face drained of color. You can't." The crowd buzzed louder, energized by the shift. For the first time, Karen seemed truly cornered. Sarah lifted her phone higher, her voice ringing out. "Everyone deserves to know the truth. And after tonight they finally will." Karen's eyes burned with fury. She turned back to the crowd, her voice shrieking. "You'll all regret this. Every single one of you." But the words no longer carried fear. Instead, they echoed hollow, bouncing off the walls of the hall as the residents glared back, united in defiance. Daniel stepped forward, his presence calm but unshakable. "No, Karen. The only one who's going to regret anything is you." For a long moment, the room was silent, just the sound of Karen's ragged breathing and the faint hum of the lights above. And then Sergeant Miller's radio crackled to life. A dispatcher's voice rang out, Unit 12 confirms status at the community center. Be advised, there's been a request for backup. Possible financial fraud investigation. The room froze. Every head turned to the radio. Karen's eyes widened in horror. Police radio confirms backup has been requested for a fraud investigation. Karen realizes the situation is spiraling beyond her control. The radio crackled again in Sergeant Miller's hand. Unit 12, backup en route. Suspected financial fraud. Proceed with caution. The words hung in the air like a verdict. Karen's face drained of color. Her binder slipped slightly in her trembling hands, papers jutting out like jagged edges of her collapsing authority. What did they just say?" she stammered. Officer Ramirez looked up from his notes, his expression calm but stern. "They said backup is on the way, ma'am. Financial fraud isn't something we can ignore." The crowd stirred. Murmurs rippled through the hall like a rising tide. "Fraud. I knew it. She's been stealing from us all along." Karen slammed her hand down on the table again, desperation cracking her voice. "This is absurd. I am the only one holding this neighborhood together. They're lying. All of them." Daniel stepped closer, his eyes locked on hers. "If that's true, Karen, then why are the police calling for backup? Why do we have a letter from the bank? Why does Sarah's video show you threatening everyone with fake fines?" Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. She turned wildly toward the officers. "You can't just believe them. I'm the HOA authority. I am the HOA." The crowd erupted in laughter and anger. Someone shouted from the back, "You're nothing but a thief with a clipboard." Karen spun around, her face red with fury. "Shut up. All of you shut up." But the room no longer belonged to her. Sarah's voice rose above the noise, calm but unyielding. "Officers, we've all been victims of her fake fines. We've all watched her abuse her power. We've all had enough." She gestured to the residents and one by one voices began to rise. "She fined me for my grandson's skateboard. She told me my flowers were the wrong color. She said my daughter's car wasn't aesthetic enough for the driveway." Each story piled onto the next, a tidal wave of accusations crashing against Karen's crumbling defenses. Officer Ramirez raised a hand, his voice firm. "All right, folks, one at a time. But it's clear there are serious allegations here." Karen's breathing grew ragged. Sweat trickled down her temple. She clutched the binder to her chest like a shield. "You don't understand. I was protecting this neighborhood from chaos. Without me, it would all fall apart." Daniel shook his head. "No, Karen. Without you, we'll finally be free." The residents erupted in applause, cheers filling the hall. Karen flinched as though struck. Sergeant Miller stepped forward, his gaze steady on Karen. "Ma'am, at this point, we're going to need you to hand over any documents related to your role in this HOA. Bank records, financial statements, all of it." Karen's eyes widened in horror. She clutched the binder tighter. "No, you can't take this. These are mine." Robert's voice rang out, sharp as a blade. "They're not yours, Karen. They belong to the community. You stole from us and now it's over." The crowd murmured in agreement, some even shouting, "Hand it over." Karen's hands shook violently as she backed toward the table, hugging the binder like it contained her very soul. Her voice cracked into a high-pitched scream. "No. If you want it, you'll have to take it from me." The room froze. The officers exchanged a tense glance. Ramirez placed a hand on his holster, not drawing but ready. "Ma'am, don't make this harder than it has to be. Hand over the binder." Karen's chest heaved. She shook her head, tears glistening in her eyes. "You don't get it. Everything I've done, I did for this neighborhood. For you." She pointed wildly at the residents, but their faces were filled with disgust and anger. Daniel's voice cut through the silence, steady and unrelenting. "You did it for yourself, Karen. You stole from us. You bullied us. You thought fear would keep us quiet. But not tonight." The crowd roared with approval, stomping feet, clapping hands. The sound was deafening. Karen covered her ears, screaming, "Stop it! Stop it!" Sergeant Miller's tone sharpened, commanding. "Ma'am, put the binder on the table. Now." Karen's eyes darted around the room like a trapped animal. Her mascara streaked down her cheeks as her grip tightened on the binder. She backed away slowly until her shoulders pressed against the wall. "No," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You can't take it. You don't understand. If this comes out, I lose everything." Ramirez stepped forward cautiously, his voice calm. "Karen, listen to me. The more you resist, the worse this gets. Cooperate and we'll sort this out fairly. Fight us and you'll regret it." Karen's body shook. Her knuckles whitened around the binder. The crowd leaned forward, the tension unbearable. And then, in a sudden burst of desperation, Karen bolted for the exit. The residents gasped, chairs screeching against the floor as people scrambled to get out of her way. Papers flew from the binder as she clutched it to her chest, running toward the door like her life depended on it. "Stop her!" someone shouted. The officers lunged forward, their footsteps pounding against the wood floor. Daniel moved too, blocking the aisle, his broad frame halting Karen in her tracks. She collided with him, nearly dropping the binder. The room erupted in chaos. Karen shrieked, her voice piercing. "Let me go." Daniel held firm, his voice booming. "You're not going anywhere." The officers closed in, their radios crackling, backup minutes away. Karen's chest heaved, her wild eyes darting between Daniel, the officers, and the furious residents closing in around her. She clutched the binder tighter, shaking like a cornered animal. And then Sergeant Miller's voice cut through the uproar, calm but final. "Ma'am, if you don't hand that over right now, we'll have no choice but to place you under arrest." The entire hall went silent. Karen's lips quivered. Her grip faltered. Her eyes filled with tears, rage, and terror all at once. The crowd leaned in, waiting for the inevitable. Karen cornered by Daniel and the officers, the binder clutched desperately in her arms, as Sergeant Miller declares she's one step away from arrest. The silence in the community hall was so heavy you could hear the faint hum of the vending machine in the corner. Karen stood pressed against the wall, clutching the binder like a lifeline, her breath ragged. Sergeant Miller's voice still echoed. "Ma'am, hand it over, or we'll place you under arrest." The residents held their breath. Sarah's phone camera hovered, recording every second. Daniel stood like a wall between Karen and freedom. Karen's eyes darted around, wild, desperate. She shook her head violently. "No, no, you don't understand. Without me this place will fall apart. I am the order here. I'm the only one who knows how to keep things in line." But then, from the middle of the room, a calm, steady voice broke through the chaos. "That's not true, Karen." Everyone turned. An older man rose slowly from his chair in the third row. His silver hair gleamed under the flickering lights. His posture, though aged, was upright and deliberate. He carried himself with the quiet dignity of someone who had fought battles no one else in the room could imagine. It was Mr. Collins, the quiet neighbor most people knew as a retired widower who spent afternoons tending to his roses. Few realized he had once been a respected attorney, the very man who had helped draft the HOA charter nearly 20 years ago. Karen's eyes narrowed. "Stay out of this, Collins. You don't know what you're talking about." But his gaze didn't waver. His voice was firm, steady, carrying the weight of authority that Karen had only pretended to wield. "Oh, I know exactly what I'm talking about," he said. He reached into his worn leather briefcase, pulling out a thick, stamped folder. He laid it on the table with deliberate force. The heavy thud echoed like a gavel. "This," Collins said, "is the original HOA deed and charter. The real rules of this neighborhood." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Karen's face blanched. "No, that's impossible. Those documents are filed with the county clerk," Collins interrupted smoothly. "Filed by me. I drafted them. And I know every word." The residents leaned in, their eyes wide. Collins flipped open the folder, pulling out crisp, stamped pages. He held one up, the official seal glinting under the harsh lights. "These are the bylaws you've been twisting, Karen. And let me tell you what they actually say." He cleared his throat, reading aloud. "The Homeowners Association shall be governed by a duly elected board. No single resident may unilaterally impose fines, penalties, or rules without majority board approval and proper documentation." The room erupted. Cheers, applause, shouts of vindication filled the air. Karen's lips trembled. That's not." Collins raised a hand, silencing her. "Furthermore, Section 6, Article 4. All financial decisions must be approved by the treasurer and verified by the board. Any unauthorized transfer of HOA funds constitutes fraud and grounds for removal." All eyes turned to Karen. Her face twisted in panic, the binder shaking in her hands. "Lies. You forged those. They're outdated. They don't apply anymore." But Collins only smiled coldly. "Outdated? No, Karen. These were reaffirmed last year. Signed and stamped." He slapped down another page, the date circled in bold ink. "Still very much in effect." The residents cheered again. Sarah raised her phone higher, capturing Karen's face as the truth burned through her last defenses. Daniel stepped forward, his voice booming. So everything you've been doing, every fake fine, every threat, none of it was legal. None of it was real. Collins nodded gravely. She's been operating outside the bylaws from the very beginning. Which means every cent she took, every so-called violation, every fabricated rule, was theft, fraud, abuse of power. The hall exploded in outrage. Neighbors shouted over one another. She stole from us. She's been lying for years. Arrest her already? Karen shook her head violently, tears streaking her cheeks. No, you don't get it. I was the board. I was the authority. Without me you're all chaos. But her words rang hollow now, drowned out by the chorus of voices condemning her. Officer Ramirez approached the table, glancing at Collins's documents. He scanned the pages quickly, his expression grim. These look legitimate, he said to Sergeant Miller. If that letter Robert had matches this. Miller nodded slowly, eyes narrowing at Karen. Then we've got probable cause for fraud. The crowd roared in approval. Karen's body shook violently. She hugged the binder tighter, whispering under her breath, No, this can't be happening. Collins leaned closer, his voice quiet but cutting like steel. The law isn't on your side, Karen. It never was. And tonight, the truth finally caught up with you. Her wild eyes flicked toward the door as though calculating escape. Her knuckles whitened around the binder. But Daniel stepped closer, blocking her path once again. His voice was steady, final. It's over, Karen. You've lost. The room fell into tense silence, all eyes on Karen. The police, the residents, the documents, all evidence stacked against her. For a long, trembling moment, it seemed she might finally break. But then, with a guttural scream, she hurled the binder onto the floor. Papers exploded into the air, scattering across the hall like confetti. She shoved past Daniel, knocking chairs aside, sprinting toward the door. The residents gasped. Stop her, someone shouted. The officers bolted forward, radios crackling. Karen's heels clattered against the tile as she ran for the exit, her sobs echoing behind her. But just as her hand reached the door handle, a shadow loomed. Backup had arrived. Another officer stepped into the doorway, blocking her escape. His silhouette filled the frame, red and blue sirens flashing behind him. Karen froze, cornered between the furious community and the law itself. Her scream of frustration split the air. Karen, cornered at the door by a backup officer, realizes her final escape has been cut off. Karen froze at the doorway, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The backup officer blocked her exit, arms crossed, his silhouette framed by the red and blue glow flashing from the cruiser outside. Her escape route was gone. She spun around, her hair disheveled, mascara streaking down her cheeks. Her eyes darted wildly over the crowd, neighbors she once intimidated with notes, threats, and scowls. But now not a single face showed fear. Only fury. Get out of my way, she shrieked, her voice shrill, cracking under the weight of panic. The officer at the door shook his head slowly. Ma'am, I think you'd better step back inside. Karen let out a ragged sob and stumbled backward, clutching the wall as though it might hold her up. Her binder, once her weapon of control, lay in pieces on the floor, its papers scattered and trampled under residents' shoes. Mr. Collins, still steady as stone, bent down and picked up one of the stamped pages from his own folder. He held it aloft, his voice carrying across the hall. Neighbors, listen. This is what the charter really says. The residents hushed, the tension thick. Collins adjusted his glasses and read aloud. The HOA board shall be elected by the residents. Any attempts to seize control without election or board approval are null and void. He paused, letting the words sink in. Murmurs spread through the crowd, relief, vindication, even laughter. Collins's voice sharpened as he continued. Karen never had authority. Not 1 ounce of it. Every so-called fine, every fabricated violation, every arbitrary demand, none of it was legal. The crowd erupted. She made us pay for nothing. She screamed at my kids like she owned the place. She threatened to take my car if I didn't repaint my garage. Karen pressed her hands over her ears, shaking her head furiously. Shut up. Shut up. You're twisting everything. I was protecting this neighborhood from people like you, lazy, sloppy rule breakers. You needed me. Daniel stepped forward, towering over her. His voice was like a hammer striking steel. We didn't need you, Karen. We needed fairness. And you gave us fear. The cheers grew louder. Residents clapped, stomped their feet, raised their phones to capture every moment. Sarah, her baby resting quietly against her, raised her voice above the roar. What about the money, Karen? Tell us how you justified stealing from the very people you claim to protect. Karen flinched, her eyes darting wildly. I didn't, it wasn't theft, it was. But Robert cut her off, stepping forward with a stack of papers in his hand. He slammed them onto the table with a force that silenced the room. These are copies of checks written from the HOA account. Made out to Karen. Signed by Karen. Cashed by Karen. The residents gasped, their fury igniting all over again. You wrote yourself checks? You stole from our dues. Years of hard-earned money, we trusted you. Karen's legs buckled. She stumbled against the table, gripping its edge. Tears streaked her face, her voice breaking into a sob. No, I deserved it. I worked harder than anyone. Those meetings, those rules, I kept everything together while the rest of you did nothing. Mr. Collins slammed his hand on the table, his voice cutting through her pleas. You didn't work for this community, you bled it dry. You wanted power, not service. The officer stepped closer now, the air heavy with inevitability. Sergeant Miller's voice was calm but sharp. Ma'am, we have evidence of unauthorized financial transactions. Unless you can provide legal justification, we'll have to move forward with charges. Karen's breathing grew frantic. She backed away again, her eyes wide, her body trembling. Charges? No, you can't. This is my neighborhood. They all need me. Without me, this place will collapse. The crowd erupted in bitter laughter. You collapsed it yourself. You destroyed the community. Daniel raised his voice, his words booming like thunder. No, Karen. Without you, we'll finally rebuild. Without you, this neighborhood will finally breathe. The room roared, unified, the sound shaking the very walls. Karen covered her face with her hands, sobbing. She slid down against the wall, sitting on the floor like a broken figure. The woman who once terrorized her neighbors now looked small, fragile, cornered. But the moment of pity was short-lived. Robert's voice rang out again, clear and unforgiving. He held up another paper. This check, this one right here, is for nearly $5,000. Written from the HOA account. Deposited into Karen's bank less than 2 months ago. Gasp. Shouts. The crowd's fury surged higher than ever. She robbed us blind. She stole while threatening us with fines. Arrest her already? The officers exchanged a glance, Ramirez's pen scratching across his notepad. Miller's jaw tightened as he studied the evidence. Karen's face twisted into desperation. No, it's not what you think. It wasn't theft. It was reimbursement. Yes, that's it, reimbursement. I advanced money for neighborhood projects. This was me taking it back. Collins shook his head, his voice cold. There were no projects. And if there were, they weren't authorized. Every dollar you took was theft. And you know it. The silence that followed was deafening. Karen looked around the room, her eyes begging, searching for even one sympathetic face. But every gaze was hard, cold, unrelenting. Her body shook as she whispered almost to herself, No, this can't be happening. I was supposed to be respected. I was supposed to be in control. Daniel crouched slightly, his voice low but clear. Respect isn't taken, Karen. It's earned. And you never earned ours. Karen sobbed harder, clutching her knees, rocking slightly on the floor. The officer stepped closer. Ramirez cleared his throat. Ma'am, unless you can provide immediate proof to dispute these documents, we'll have no choice. But before he could finish, the sound of the door slamming open cut through the hall. Everyone turned. A younger man in a suit entered, his expression tense, his eyes locked on Karen. He held a leather briefcase, his tie slightly loosened as if he had come in a rush. Karen's head snapped up. Her sobs caught in her throat. Richard? Gasps echoed. Neighbors whispered. Her husband had arrived. Karen's husband burst into the meeting, his presence shocking everyone, especially Karen, who now faces judgment not only from the law and her neighbors, but from her own family. The door slammed shut behind him, echoing across the hall. Richard, Karen's husband, stood tall in his charcoal suit, the briefcase dangling from one hand. His expression was hard, unreadable, but his eyes burned as they locked on his wife. The residents fell silent, their whispers fading into a tense hush. Even the officers paused, watching the unexpected turn. Karen scrambled to her feet, mascara streaked and trembling. Richard, thank God you're here. Tell them. Tell them I was only doing what's right for the neighborhood. Richard's jaw clenched. He took a slow step forward, setting his briefcase on the table with a dull thud. His voice was quiet, but it carried through the hall. Karen, what have you done? Her lips quivered. They're lying. They twisted everything. They don't appreciate what I've done for them. I held this neighborhood together. Richard cut her off sharply. Enough. The single word sliced through the room. Karen flinched like she'd been struck. Mr. Collins adjusted his glasses, watching carefully. Daniel and Sarah exchanged a glance. Robert leaned forward, his fingers resting on the damning stack of checks. Sergeant Miller cleared his throat, his tone even. Sir, do you have any connection to these accounts or records? Richard exhaled slowly, his shoulders sagging. Yes. Unfortunately, I do. Gasps spread across the hall. Karen's face twisted in panic. No, don't say anything. They'll twist your words too. But Richard ignored her. He opened the briefcase, pulled out a folder, and spread documents across the table. Bank statements, spreadsheets, photocopies, all with Karen's name on them. She told me she was handling HOA funds legally, Richard said, his voice steady but heavy with shame. She said she had permission. But when I saw these transfers, I knew something was wrong. He tapped the papers with a trembling finger. Nearly $15,000 moved from the HOA account into our joint checking account over the past year. The room erupted in outrage. 15,000? She stole that much? From us. Karen's knees buckled. She grabbed the table, shaking her head violently. No, that was reimbursement. We had expenses, don't you remember, Richard? I did it for us. Richard's face hardened. For us? Or for you? Karen's lips parted, but no words came out. Sarah stepped forward, her voice ringing with quiet fury. You fined me for leaving a stroller on my porch, Karen? You said the neighborhood's reputation mattered more than anything. All the while, you were stealing our money to pay for your luxuries. Another neighbor shouted, she told me I couldn't hang laundry in my backyard. Said it lowered property values. Meanwhile, she's lining her pockets. The crowd roared, their anger boiling over. Karen stumbled backward, her hands raised as if to shield herself. Stop it. Stop judging me. I was keeping order. You needed me. But her voice broke under the weight of the truth. Mr. Collins picked up one of Richard's documents, scanning it with a lawyer's practiced eye. This matches the bank letter Robert found. Multiple transfers, none of them authorized. Karen, this is an order. This is fraud. Karen shook her head furiously. No. It's not fraud if I intended to pay it back. Robert slammed his palm on the table. Then why did you cash checks with personal expenses written in the memo line? The hall gasped again. The residents' voices overlapped, furious, disgusted. Personal expenses? While she fined us for decorations? She should be locked up. Karen's sobs grew louder, broken, guttural. She dropped to her knees, her binder long forgotten on the floor, her hands clawing at the air as if she could somehow pull her authority back from the wreckage. Richard's face twisted with grief. He looked down at his wife, shaking his head slowly. You didn't just betray this neighborhood, Karen. You betrayed me. Our family. Everything we built together. Tears welled in his eyes, but his voice was steady. I can't defend you anymore. Karen let out a strangled scream, crawling toward him on her knees. No. Richard, please. You promised, you said we were a team. Don't let them do this to me. Richard stepped back, his face hardening. He looked at Sergeant Miller. Officers, I think you have enough evidence. The crowd exploded in cheers, their voices filling the hall like a tidal wave. Yes. Finally. Justice. Sergeant Miller exchanged a glance with Ramirez, then turned back to Karen. His voice was steady, formal. Ma'am, at this point, we have sufficient cause to detain you for questioning regarding financial fraud and misappropriation of community funds. Karen's face twisted in horror. She shook her head wildly, backing against the wall again. No. You can't. I did this for all of you. You'll regret it. You'll regret it when this neighborhood falls apart. But her words were drowned out by laughter, jeers, and clapping. The community that once cowered under her threats now stood tall, united in victory. Sarah lowered her phone slightly, whispering into the camera, "Justice is finally being served." Karen let out one last piercing scream. I am the HOA. I am the rules. But her voice was hoarse, hollow, stripped of power. Ramirez stepped forward, reaching for his cuffs. The room went silent, the residents leaning forward, breathless. And just as he reached for her wrist, Karen's eyes darted to the table. With a sudden burst of energy, she grabbed one of the checks Robert had laid down. She clutched it tightly in her fist, screaming, "You'll never take me alive with nothing. I still have proof, I still have this." The room gasped. Sergeant Miller's voice barked, sharp and commanding. Karen, drop it. Now. But Karen shook her head violently, her grip white-knuckled, her eyes wild. This isn't over. It'll never be over. Karen clutches a stolen check in her fist, screaming that it isn't over, as officers close in, leaving the residents stunned about what she'll do next. Karen crouched on the floor, clutching the stolen check in her fist like it was her last weapon. Her mascara ran in black rivers down her cheeks, her breath ragged, her hair sticking to her damp face. The once dominant voice of the neighborhood had been reduced to screams and sobs, but still she wouldn't let go. You'll never beat me, she shrieked, her voice echoing against the cinderblock walls. This neighborhood is mine. Do you hear me? Mine. The officers advanced, their hands steady. Sergeant Miller's voice was low but commanding. Karen, dropped the check. It's over. Karen shook her head furiously, clutching it tighter. No. If I drop this, I lose everything. And I will never lose. The residents stared, their disgust palpable. Some had their phones raised, still recording. Others shook their heads in disbelief. For years they'd feared this woman, but now, watching her unravel, the fear was gone. Daniel took a slow step forward, his voice calm but loud enough for all to hear. You don't get it, Karen? You've already lost. Karen's eyes widened, her mouth twisting into a sneer. No. They'll listen to me. They always listen to me. But when she turned toward the residents, expecting obedience, she saw only cold, unflinching stares. Mr. Patel rose from his seat, his cane tapping against the floor as he stood tall. We're done listening to you. A ripple spread through the room as neighbors began to rise one by one. Sarah, with her baby on her hip, stood next. Robert followed, his hands clenched into fists of resolve. Mr. Collins adjusted his glasses, his expression firm, and stood as well. Within seconds, the entire hall was on its feet, every man, woman, and child who had once bowed to Karen's intimidation. Karen's voice cracked, desperate. Sit down. I said sit down. But no one did. Instead, Daniel turned toward the double doors at the back of the hall. We don't need to stay here and listen to this anymore. The neighbors murmured in agreement. Someone called out, let's go. And just like that they began to move. Chairs screeched against the floor as the first row filed out. Sarah led the way, her phone still recording, her baby resting peacefully against her shoulder. Behind her came Robert, clutching the evidence that sealed Karen's fate. Then Collins, his stack of stamped documents under his arm. Then more and more, until the aisles filled with a steady stream of neighbors walking out together. Their footsteps were measured, unified, defiant. Karen screamed, her voice shrill, broken. No. You can't walk out on me. I'm the HOA. I'm your leader. But the crowd didn't even look at her. Daniel passed her last, pausing just long enough to meet her wild eyes. His voice was calm, final. You're nothing, Karen. Nothing without us. Then he turned his back and walked out, the doors swinging wide behind him. The sound of dozens of footsteps faded into the night, replaced by the hum of crickets outside, the soft chirp of a police radio, and Karen's ragged sobs. The hall was empty now, save for Karen, the officers, and the scattered evidence of her downfall. Karen collapsed to her knees again, her voice cracking into a whisper. No, they can't leave me. They need me. They need me. Her words dissolved into broken sobs. She clutched the check to her chest like it might still save her, but it looked pitiful now, just one scrap of paper against a mountain of truth. Sergeant Miller sighed, shaking his head. Ma'am, the people have spoken. It's over. Karen lifted her tear-streaked face, her eyes bloodshot, her voice hoarse. No, it's not over. I still have power. But her words faded as she looked around at the empty seats, the scattered papers, the abandoned hall. For the first time she realized she was truly alone. Ramirez stepped closer, his cuffs ready. His voice was firm, professional. Ma'am, stand up. We need to finish this. Karen's grip on the check loosened, her hand trembling. The paper slipped from her fingers, fluttering to the floor. It landed silently among the debris of her binder, her threats, her lies. She stared at it, her body shaking. They walked out. Outside the hall, faint cheers could be heard, the residents gathering together under the streetlights, united without her. Their voices rose, stronger together than they had ever been under her rule. Inside, Karen let out a strangled sob. The sound was so raw, so broken, it almost bordered on inhuman. Sergeant Miller stepped closer, his voice quiet but resolute. Karen, it's time. Karen didn't move. She stayed on her knees, staring at the floor, whispering to herself. I was supposed to be respected. I was supposed to matter. The silence was broken only by the rustle of the officers' gear, the soft crackle of their radios, and Karen's quiet weeping. And then, Ramirez reached down, pulling her gently but firmly to her feet. The metallic click of cuffs echoed through the empty hall. But before Miller could read her rights, the door swung open again. The crowd had returned. They weren't cheering now. They weren't angry either. They stood in the doorway, silent, watching. Dozens of eyes on Karen, their faces unreadable. Karen's chest heaved as she looked at them, her face a mask of desperation. "You came back," she whispered, hope flickering for the briefest second. But Daniel stepped forward, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "We didn't come back for you. We came back to make sure justice is done." Karen's face crumbled, her hope vanishing. Her body sagged in the officer's grip, her head bowing under the weight of defeat. Karen is cuffed as the residents re-enter, not to save her but to watch her humiliation, ensuring justice is carried out. The hall was silent, save for the faint hum of the overhead lights and the distant chirp of crickets outside. Karen stood cuffed between Sergeant Miller and Officer Ramirez, her head bowed, her makeup smeared in streaks of black and red. The once commanding voice of the HOA had been reduced to a hollow whisper. She tried to speak, her lips trembling. "Please, you don't understand? I was only trying to help." But no one moved. No one offered her sympathy. Daniel stepped forward, his arms crossed, his voice steady. "You didn't help us, Karen. You stole from us. You bullied us. And now you answer for it." Karen shook her head weakly, her voice breaking. "I was supposed to matter. I was supposed to be respected." Her words dissolved into sobs. Sergeant Miller adjusted his grip, his tone professional. "Ma'am, you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." The metallic sound of those words, so cold, so final, echoed through the hall. The residents who had re-entered to witness the end, stood in silence. They watched as the woman who once ruled with fear was reduced to nothing more than a criminal in handcuffs. Robert stepped forward, his voice steady. "Take her away. We'll handle the rest." Karen's husband, Richard, stood apart from the group, his face pale, his eyes hollow. He didn't step forward to defend her. He didn't move to comfort her. Instead, he lowered his head, turned away and muttered, "I warned you, Karen. I warned you." Her body shook violently at his words, and for the first time, her sobs turned from anger to despair. The officers led her toward the doors, her heels scraping against the floor. Each step echoed like the closing of a chapter. The neighbors followed, their footsteps measured, their eyes fixed on her. Outside, the night was alive with flashing sirens, the faint hum of another squad car pulling up for support. As Karen was guided into the back of the cruiser, her voice cracked into one final scream. "You'll regret this. You'll regret walking out on me. You'll see, without me this neighborhood will fall apart." The door slammed shut. And for the first time in years the neighborhood was quiet. The residents stood together in the parking lot, the cool night air wrapping around them. Some exhaled long-held breaths. Others exchanged relieved glances. Sarah rocked her baby gently, whispering, "It's finally over." Daniel placed a hand on Robert's shoulder. "You did the right thing bringing that letter forward." Robert nodded. "We all did. This time we stood together." Mr. Collins stepped forward, holding the stamped deed under his arm. His voice was calm but resolute. "The HOA isn't just about rules, it's about community. About protecting each other, not tearing each other down. We forgot that for too long." The crowd murmured in agreement. One woman spoke up. "So what happens now?" Daniel glanced at Collins, then back at the group. "Now we rebuild. We elect a real board. We use our funds for what they're supposed to be used for, maintenance, improvements, helping each other. No more fake fines. No more fear." The neighbors clapped, some cheering quietly, others wiping tears from their eyes. Sarah raised her phone one last time, recording as she spoke. "This is what happens when a community stands together. When we stop letting bullies define us." She lowered the phone, her eyes soft but determined. "We'll tell this story. We'll make sure no one forgets what happened here." The residents nodded, their unity stronger than ever. Richard lingered at the edge of the group, his face cast in shadow. He didn't say another word. With slow, heavy steps, he walked away into the darkness, his figure swallowed by the night. No one stopped him. Because tonight wasn't about him, or even about Karen. It was about the neighbors, the community, the people who finally found their voice. The flashing lights faded as the cruiser pulled away, carrying Karen into the distance. The hum of its engine faded, leaving only the quiet peace of the suburban street. Daniel turned to the group, his voice soft but powerful. She thought fear would keep us divided. But unity was stronger. We walked out together, and that's why we won. A cheer rose from the group, echoing into the night sky. For the first time in a long time, the neighborhood felt whole. Sometimes the loudest voice in the room isn't the strongest. Sometimes the person who demands respect the most deserves it the least. Karen thought she could control her neighbors through fear. But in the end, it was unity, ordinary people standing up together, that defeated her. What would you have done if you were in that HOA hall? Would you have stood up? Would you have walked out? Let us know in the comments below. And remember, when a bully tries to take over, silence gives them power. Speaking out takes it back.